You're a thought leader. You know a lot and you can share a lot and you can tell a lot. But guess what? People don't want to read a boring book. You might bore people to death by sharing everything you know. So, how do you decide what's important? How do you captivate the reader? How do you get them to read the book so they see you as the thought leader that they want to hire and bring in to change their company and change their lives? You're in the right spot because we're going to learn how to do that today. Hi, I'm Dan Janelle. I'm a book strategist. I've written more than a dozen books, and I can help you write your book no matter where you are in the process. I can help you as a ghostwriter, book coach, or developmental editor. Now, let's get started. Our guest today is Julie Broad. Julie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've written 3 books myself and also have a company called Booklaunchers, which is a full service self-publishing team who will help you write, publish, and ultimately promote your book so that you achieve your goals from your book at the end.
Fantastic. So, Julie, how can you write a book that isn't boring? And I got to tell you, I'm working with a client now who's running a book that is like really, really boring. It's like a set of lists and checklists, and it's really good, but it is duller than a kitchen knife that's been through the dishwasher 10,000 times. What can you do to bring this book to life?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things, as I'm sure you're reaching in your toolkit to use them all. But the first thing I always start with is to focus on your reader. Who is that reader? And remember, the book might be about you, but it's not for you. And so you got to meet the reader where they're at and connect with them. And a checklist doesn't connect. You got to have some emotion there.
Mhm,
and
mhm.
and I think, one of the challenges a lot of, really experienced people have is that they're so good at what they do that they don't take it back to the beginning. They don't take it back to where they started and feel those emotions again of what it was like to kind of encounter the problem that they've ultimately solved. And so I think that's one thing is think about that reader, think about where they are, and think about how they feel right now and write to that.
Cool. So how can you tap into those emotions? What kind of stories can you tell that bring those emotions to life?
Yeah, I think you kind of tap into again what you've already overcome. So maybe you've never been your ideal reader. You're solving a problem for somebody that you haven't actually been. In that, otherwise I'd say just write your story, right? Like how did you get to where you are today, and what did you overcome? But sometimes you've solved a problem that somebody else has, and you've never had that problem, but you've certainly had some sort of emotion that they're feeling, right? Rejection, fear of failure, fear of success, imposter syndrome. Like those are all very common emotions. So tell a story about a time when you had that very emotion that your reader is feeling right now that's had them pick up your book. Give them that connection point so they know that you get them, that you understand them, and that your book isn't just going to give them checklists and tools, but it is the thing they need and they want to read it. They don't just need to read it.
Great. What other advice would you give? What other tools are in your tool chest to turn a book into a book that they just can't put down? If
I
any
mean,
nonfiction book is in that category, but as close as possible.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of books can fall into that category, but again, it goes back to one of the tests I do when I get a draft is I look how many times, how many sentences, how many paragraphs start with I. And as much as possible, you want to avoid that. I mean, there's always situations where you're going to tell a story and you're going to say I, but if you can put it into the words of a reader and be like and tell the story in a way that doesn't use the I, right? Instead of saying I felt this, imagine walking in a room and suddenly like all eyes turn to you, right? That can put the reader in your shoes instead of saying I walked in the room and everybody started to stare at me, right? Like you want to have the reader experience it like fiction, right? Fiction does that in such a beautiful way. And for some reason, nonfiction often just tells. And so I would say, bring the reader into everything as much as you possibly can. And seeing how many words or how many sentences start with I is a good test.
I love doing that with my clients as well because I'll say, I will show you how to blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, no, you will learn, you will discover, you will
Exactly.
find out. And that way it becomes their their book. And we talk about a signature story. I always have them put in lines like, have you ever felt this way? Has this ever happened to you? And that way they could see themselves in your story instead of
Yeah.
just thinking that, oh wow, she's wonderful. I could never do what she did because she's just so accomplished. But you put those little words in there, those questions in there, and it brings it back to the reader, which is really the whole point. Cool.
Yeah,
So,
and that's, I was just going to say, and that's exactly kind of where, one of the other tips I have is whenever you're starting a new paragraph, or not a new paragraph, but a new chapter or a new section, is to use those kind of questions or have a stat that will startle people or surprise them at least. So you're not just saying a boring stat, but like, something that's going to be like, what? or something that's even slightly controversial. Like my first book was a real estate book, and I challenged people to I'm like, passive income is a myth. Right. And that was kind of a challenging statement because most people believe they're investing in real estate for passive income. So I would challenge them. And so if you can start sections and chapters with those questions that kind of invite the reader in or startle them or surprise them, those things will engage them and want to keep them going. They'll be like, oh my goodness. And they just kind of re-engage and keep going from there.
perfect. I hadn't thought about that. I used to do that when I was a journalist and a reporter, and I'd use that all the time. Would you believe? And all that. I just haven't thought about that for a while. So sometimes we just need to be reminded about all these wonderful tools that are available. So cool, so cool. So you're a thought leader and you've written your PhD and you have 700 pages, but a book today is about 150 to maybe 200 pages at most. How do you decide what to cut?
Yeah, I like to go back to that reader and finding a specific outcome of an outcome for the reader. So, and what I mean by outcome of outcome is I'm not just telling them how to become a leader. I'm telling them specifically, when you become a leader, you're now going to be catapulted to run the company, to be a C-suite executive, or now you're going to be able to manage all these millennials that are in this fast growing tech company, or, it's like a very specific problem. And when you do that, you can look at all of the material that you have, and you can see that only some of it is directly related to achieving that outcome of an outcome. The rest of it could be book 2, book 3, book 4 in the series. But for this particular book, you want to focus on that one outcome of an outcome and deliver on that.
Cool. Do you have any tips on how to use your book as a marketing tool to get more business for thought leaders, for professionals, for business executives?
Yeah, first, don't think of it as a marketing tool. A lot of people go in, they're like, I just need a business card book. And I'm like, that's the best way to write a crappy book and not have a book that you're actually going to be proud of, is to kind of, because anybody can have a business card, right? You can go and print them off and voila. But a book is an investment of time, energy, resources, thinking power. And so you really want to think of it as, how am I going to serve the audience that I want to build into my business? How am I going to serve them with this book? And then use that book as a tool to have an impact in the world. And when you have that impact, people are going to want to work with you, right? A lot of people are afraid of putting all their best stuff in a book. But what happens is people read the book and they go, can you do this for me? Right? I don't want to do, you're amazing. I love what you did. Now you go do this for me. And you've just laid out how to do it. They could do it themselves, but they don't want to. So, that's why I don't think of it as a marketing tool. Think of it as an impact tool. And ultimately, it's going to grow your business as long as your audiences are the same and the problem you're solving unites with your business.
Fantastic. Great advice. What other advice do you have for making your book sound more interesting?
Yeah, I would say, going back to that PhD candidate, because we've had a lot of those, is really write it at, as much as possible. You don't have to sound smart to your colleagues. Like, we've had a lot of people who are really hung up on using those big words and jargon and things that make them sound smart to their fellow PhDs. However, their audience isn't that PhD candidate. It's the person that is, again, it's that problem they're trying to solve. And so I don't like saying dumb it down, but you want to simplify your writing. You want to take it down to a grade 8 level or lower if you can. Grade 6 to grade 8, it's kind of that sweet spot where it's easy to read. It's not a chore, because otherwise that's exactly what people are going to look at it like, is this is a textbook and they're going to feel like they have to read it, and it's going to sit on their bedside table and never, ever get picked up, which we don't want. So you really want to not worry about sounding smart to your colleagues and focus on creating something your reader wants to read.
What's the biggest mistake that writers make when they're writing their book?
Well, there's quite a few. One is they don't finish and they don't publish.
Okay.
But I think it's the reader gets lost in this. And I think a lot of times that if you lose your reader, it's going to be very hard to market your book, because you really want to focus on that reader and that very specific outcome they're getting. Because for nonfiction, that's what we're selling. We're not selling a leadership book. We're selling what happens after you've gained this particular style of leadership, what's going to change in your business or your career. And you want to be laser focused on that throughout your book, because it will allow you to market the book so much easier, and people will tell other people about your book because you solved a problem.
Fantastic. You've given us a lot of great information today. Tell us who your ideal client is and how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, we work with thought leaders and folks in business that want to write a book to help grow that business and that brand. And booklaunchers.tv on YouTube is where I hang out. So come on over and we can hang out on channel. We have new videos every Tuesday and Friday. And then booklaunchers.com is where you can learn about our services.
Fantastic. And everyone listening today can find out more than 100 videos on our YouTube channel on how to write your book in a flash. Thanks for listening.